This is really a continental problem that we're facing here, and where we speak of economic recovery globally hinging on a jobless recovery, what are the major challenges the African jobs market faces right now? And I know I'm talking very umbrella terms at this stage.
Yes. Well, thank you, and good morning, Alishia, and good morning to everyone. I think the point is that if one is looking at the continent as a whole, then it is looking at it at a macro level. And generally, in doing so, one has to have a long view about what is systemically problematic and challenging. And the essence of the problems that we are facing, particularly at the level of employment and unemployment in the African continent, at the heart of that is whether our schooling systems and our education institutions are in fact producing young people who can be employable in the labour market. That is one very big question. And the reality is that we are facing what the UNESCO has referred to as a silent emergency in our education systems across the continent.
If we use South Africa as a case in point, I mean, we're looking at the schooling system here, and just yesterday we had parents north of PE demanding that schools employ full-time teachers as opposed to temporary teachers. Is enough of a focus being placed on getting the right people in the right place for education and that entire upskilling process, so human resources in that regard?
Well, I think that I don't think that there's enough attention being given to the teaching crisis, not just in South Africa, but across the continent. We have estimated through UNESCO's research that something like 10.3 million teachers are needed globally. So it's a global shortage of teachers that we have. 10.3 million teachers are needed globally if we are going to reach the Education for All goals by 2015, which is something as basic as getting access to universal primary education in Africa's schooling systems. In Africa alone, we need something like 1.3 million teachers by 2015 to, in order to accommodate the increase in the number of kids who are going to school, certainly at primary level. And one has to have a long view about this if one is going to look seriously at how we are going to create decent work for people when they leave school, enough for them to earn and live a decent and dignified life. And I think that the fact that it is a silent emergency is indicative of the fact that there's not enough attention being paid to that. And we have very serious problems like very low pay of teachers. We've got significant numbers of teachers that are unqualified and underqualified in the system, and enough attention is not being paid to raising the skills levels of the teachers in the system itself.
Human resources aside though, I mean, if we're looking at solutions and mechanisms that can be used to effectively tackle the problem, we've got e-learning now in focus, where technology can be one of those components used to achieve those goals. Run us through how exactly.
Well, you know, the important point to make is that the technologies in itself is not a panacea. That it holds huge potential in the sense that through the technologies like mobile phones, for instance, and increasingly things like cheaper laptops that teachers are going to be given, certainly in South Africa, the reality is that it would extend access to education, it would extend the possibilities of training teachers remotely, etc. But the point is that on its own, it is not the answer. What is required also is the leadership. We need attention to the skills development process of teachers. And I think that the problem that we've had is that the impression has been created that if we just supply teachers with technologies, if we just supply schools with PC labs, if we supply kids with programs through online television and mobile phones, that alone would actually resolve serious problems related to education and skills development. And the reality is that we also need our institutions in place. We need our systems in place around developing teacher professionals, professional development for teachers, etc. And that's the important message that the eLearning Africa conference would also like to put across. And in doing so, inviting a whole range of stakeholders in this very serious and very crucial and very urgent conversation around what do we do and how can we effectively use the technologies as part of a system-wide intervention.
This especially in a context where you've got governments focused on providing basic commodities, food security, that type of thing, running water, access to basic commodities, and where technology is not necessarily the priority that it should be at this stage.
Well, some people would argue that governments are not even providing basic commodities. We've got a food crisis in the continent. We've got severe shortages of basic facilities in schools, in communities across the continent and in South Africa. And it's interesting you mentioning security, because I'm certainly hoping that our president will also pay attention to security issues in South Africa in the context of rising crime, etc. So along with the basic needs of people is also the basic and fundamental right to a good and quality education.
A government's role aside, what role does the private sector need to be playing here in terms of training and upskilling? Because certainly in South Africa, we've had a government continuing to dominate the private sector in terms of the number of jobs being created.
Well, the reality is that the private sector, both the multinational private sector and the small, medium enterprises across the continent have already played quite a significant role in investing in teacher education and in creating and developing skills for young people in schools and young people out of schools. A number of private sector companies have in fact partnered with NGOs and with ministries of education on a number of programs to upgrade skills and to also train teachers. In South Africa, we are aware of big companies working with the Department of Education and organizations like SchoolNet South Africa in training up to 45,000 teachers on the use of and integration of technologies in schools. So there has been quite a significant contribution made by the private sector, but the reality is that seems not to be enough. And there needs to be a far greater involvement of a multi-stakeholder process involving communities and parents and the private sector, as well as NGOs in particular in this process.